I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of the Meridian Grand Hotel when my phone buzzed with a photo of my brother cutting the ribbon on his new headquarters, the building I had funded. He was smiling that smile I'd known my whole life, the one that meant he'd gotten away with something again. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough in the past 8 months to last me the rest of my life. I just sat there in the dark, engine running, and I thought, they think this is over. It wasn't. My name is Iris Calloway. I'm 34 years old, and for 11 years, I worked as a forensic auditor at Pinnacle Risk Solutions, a firm that corporate clients hired when they suspected someone inside their organization was stealing from them. I was good at it, exceptionally good. I had a talent for finding the one transaction that didn't make sense, the one account that shouldn't exist, the one signature that didn't match. My boss, a man named Gerald Park, who'd been doing this work for 30 years, once told me I had a gift for seeing what other people trained themselves not to see. I had a beautiful apartment in downtown Chicago, a 7-year-old rescue greyhound named Biscuit, a small investment portfolio I'd been building since I was 26. And I had my family, my mother, Patricia, 61, a retired school principal, my older brother, Landon, 38, a commercial real estate developer, and my sister-in-law, Brooke, 36, Landon's wife of 4 years, who worked in marketing and had never once in her life met a mirror she didn't like. I loved my family. That's the part people don't understand when they hear what happened. They assume there must have been years of tension, some long simmering resentment I'd been swallowing. But there wasn't. Or at least, I didn't think there was. Landon and I had always been close. He called me every Sunday. He came to my apartment for Christmas one year when a snowstorm grounded his flights. He was the person I called when I got my first big promotion, and he was the one who drove 4 hours to sit with me in the hospital when I had a health scare 2 years ago that turned out to be nothing. I loved him, and that's exactly why it hurt as much as it did. It started, or rather, I found out it had started, on a Tuesday morning in March when I received a call from my bank. Not a fraud alert, a courtesy call from a senior account manager named Devin, who said he wanted to touch base about some recent activity on my home equity line of credit. I didn't know I had a home equity line of credit. I told Devin that. There was a pause on his end that lasted just long enough for my stomach to drop. Ms. Calloway, he said carefully. The line was opened 14 months ago. The current balance drawn is $212,000. I had to ask him to repeat the number. Then I wrote it down on a sticky note because I didn't trust myself to hold it in my head. $212,000. Borrowed against my apartment. The apartment I'd bought with 7 years of savings and a down payment I'd made in cash. Who authorized this? I asked. Devin told me that the application had been submitted with my name, my social security number, my employment verification, and a notarized signature. I asked him to send me everything, every document, every transaction record going back to the beginning. He said he would. I hung up the phone and sat very still for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and started working. The thing about being a forensic auditor is that you learn very quickly that financial fraud almost never looks the way people imagine. It's not usually some dramatic wire transfer to an offshore account. It's small, it's patient, it's dozens of ordinary-looking transactions that, individually, mean nothing. But when you lay them out side by side, the shape of what someone did becomes impossible to ignore. What I found in the next 72 hours was not small. The home equity line had been drawn down in 4 separate tranches over 14 months. The money had moved through a shell company, registered in Delaware, called Calloway Development Partners. My last name, my brother's industry, into a series of accounts that ultimately fed into the construction financing for Landon's newest project. A 6-story mixed-use development on the north side of Chicago that he'd been talking about for 3 years. My brother had used my name to borrow money. He had forged my signature on a notarized document, which meant someone else had been involved. He had taken $212,000 from equity I had built with my own work over 7 years, and he had used it to build his building. And my mother had co-signed the shell company's operating agreement. I found that part last. I almost missed it. It was buried in a subsidiary filing, attached as an exhibit to a lease agreement, her signature small and neat at the bottom of the page in the handwriting I'd known my whole life. Patricia Calloway, co-manager. I sat with that for a long time. I had a colleague. Her name was Simone Adler, 41, a senior investigator who had worked white-collar cases for the FBI before joining our firm. Simone was the kind of person who brought her own tea bags to client meetings and never raised her voice, not even when presenting evidence that would end someone's career. I called her at 11 o'clock at night and told her what I'd found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Have you confronted either of them?" she asked. "No? Good. Don't. Not yet." A pause. "Ice. This is wire fraud. This is identity theft. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand," I said. "You need to decide what you want to do." I looked at the sticky note on my desk. $212,000. My mother's signature on a document I'd never seen. "I want everything," I said. "Every transaction, every filing, every person who... I want to know exactly what happened and exactly who knew." "Then we work it like a case," Simone said. "We start at the beginning. We started at the beginning." The notarized signature was the first thread. Notarized documents require a commissioned notary public, someone who is legally required to witness the signing in person and verify the signer's identity, which meant either the notary had committed fraud themselves or someone had used a false ID in my name. Simone pulled the notary's commission records through the Illinois Secretary of State's office. The notary's name was a woman who operated out of a UPS store in Evanston. Simone drove out there on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at work, pretending to need a document notarized. She described the woman to me afterward. Mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain, a small framed photo of golden retrievers on her desk. "I showed her a photo of you," Simone said. "Told her I was doing an internal audit and needed to verify some past work." She remembered the transaction. She said the woman who came in had your ID and your name and she matched the photo on the license. So someone had a fake ID made, a very good one. Current address, current photo. Someone went to considerable trouble. I thought about that. Someone had gone to the trouble of creating a fraudulent identity document with my information. That wasn't something you did casually. That was premeditated. The next thread was Calloway Development Partners itself. A Delaware LLC is easy to form. You can do it online in about 20 minutes for less than $100. But the operating agreement required signatures and, crucially, a registered agent. I traced the registered agent to a firm in Wilmington that processed incorporation documents for hundreds of entities. The email address on file for the LLC belonged to a domain that had been created the same week the entity was formed. But the billing address for that domain was Landon's office address in Chicago. I printed that out and added it to the folder I was building. The folder was getting thick. Simone and I worked on weekends in the evenings, whenever we could carve out time around our actual jobs. We were careful. I didn't tell anyone else what I was doing. I went to Landon's Sunday phone calls as if nothing had changed, listening to him talk about the development project, the construction timeline, the financing he'd pulled together. He sounded proud. He sounded like my brother. I asked him once, casually, whether he'd had any trouble with the financing. "You know how it is," he said. "Creative solutions." I said, "Yeah, I know how it is." The one moment I almost broke was in April, when my mother called to tell me she was planning a party to celebrate Landon's building, a ribbon-cutting ceremony she was organizing at his office. She wanted my help choosing the catering. "I think we should do something elegant," she said. "Station style, not just trays. Landon deserves something special." I held the phone against my ear and stared at the folder on my desk. "Sure, Mom," I said. "I'll look into it." She did not invite me to the party. I found that out from a cousin who texted me a photo the day after it happened. Landon in a hard hat, my mother beside him, both of them grinning in front of a building that had my money in its foundation. My name was not mentioned in the speech he gave, according to the cousin. He had thanked his investors, his team, and his family. I was his family. I had funded 12% of his construction costs. He thanked me by not telling me the party had happened. That night, I took Biscuit for a long walk along the lakefront, and I let myself feel it. The full weight of it, the specific grief of being used by the people who were supposed to love you most. I cried walking past the water in the dark, and Biscuit pressed his long, thin body against my leg as we walked, the way he always did when he sensed I was upset. Then I went home, washed my face, and got back to work. By the end of May, Simone and I had built a complete picture. Landon had been planning the fraud for almost 2 years. He'd had a cash shortfall in his development financing. His lender had required more equity than he'd projected, and he'd been too proud to admit the gap to his existing investors. Someone, we never established who first, had suggested using my equity line as a bridge. My mother had agreed to help structure the shell company. A contact of Landon's, a man named Philip, who operated on the periphery of the Chicago real estate world, had arranged the fraudulent ID through connections we couldn't fully trace. The plan, as best we could reconstruct it, was that the building would sell units quickly, the construction loan would be repaid, and the equity line would be quietly paid down before I ever noticed. Landon would have considered it borrowing, not stealing. He would have told himself it was temporary, that he was going to pay it back, that I would never have to know. That's how it almost always works, in my experience. The people who do this don't think of themselves as criminals. They think of themselves as people in a difficult situation making a practical decision. They tell themselves they'll make it right. They almost never do. You have enough, Simone told me one evening in late May. More than enough. You could hand this to the U.S. Attorney's office tomorrow and walk away. I know. What are you waiting for? I thought about it. I want to talk to Landon first. Before anything official happens, I want him to look at me and explain it. Simone looked at me for a long moment. That's not about the case, she said. No, I agreed, it's not. I called Landon on a Sunday, the way I always did. I told him I needed to see him in person. I told him I had something to discuss about some financial paperwork I'd come across. I kept my voice completely normal. We met at a coffee shop near his office the following Tuesday. He was wearing the blue jacket he'd had for years, the one with the slightly frayed left cuff that he refused to replace because he'd bought it the week he closed his first deal. He looked like my brother. He looked like the person who drove 4 hours to sit with me in a hospital waiting room. I put the folder on the table between us. He looked at it, then he looked at me, and I watched something happen in his face. Not shock, not even guilt, exactly. It was more like the quiet collapse of something he'd been holding up for a long time. Iris, he started. Don't, I said. Just don't tell me it was temporary. Don't tell me you were going to pay it back. I've heard that explanation in depositions dozens of times, and I need you to respect me enough not to say it to my face. He was quiet. Did Mom know from the beginning? I asked. He looked at the table. Landon. She knew, he said. His voice was very low. It was her idea. The LLC structure. She said it was cleaner. I had known that. I had the documents to prove it. But hearing him say it out loud was different. My mother had looked at her 2 children and decided that one of them could be used without being told. She had made that calculation quietly and then called me the next Sunday to ask how I was doing. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I heard my own voice, as if from a distance, steady, deliberate, the voice I used in client presentations. You're going to make me whole. Every dollar, every cent of interest. The loan gets paid off in full within 90 days. You're going to put that in writing today. Witnessed and notarized. I paused. Actually, don't use your notary. Something flickered in his face, almost like he might have laughed in another life. If you do that, I said, I don't go to federal prosecutors. But if you miss a single payment, or if I find one more transaction I wasn't supposed to find, I hand everything I have to the U.S. Attorney's Office and I let them decide what wire fraud and identity theft are worth. I closed the folder. Do you understand me? Yes, he said. Does Mom know what I'm capable of finding? A long pause. She knows what you do for a living. Then she should have thought about that. I want to be careful here about what happened next, because I've told this story to friends and they always expect it to feel triumphant. They expect me to describe the conversation with my mother as cathartic, some long overdue reckoning that ended with tears and apology, and the beginning of something repaired. It wasn't like that. I called my mother the following morning. I told her I knew. I told her what I knew. I told her what I had agreed to with Landon and what I expected from her. A formal apology in writing and complete transparencies about any other accounts, documents, or entities that carried my name. She cried. Then she defended herself. She said Landon had needed help, and I had all that equity just sitting there, and she'd known I would say no if she asked, so she decided it was better not to ask. She said she had believed he would pay it back. She said she hadn't thought of it as hurting me. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "You made a decision about my property and my name and my financial future without telling me, because you decided that what Landon needed mattered more than what I was owed. I need you to understand that's what you did." She was quiet for a while. "I'm sorry, Iris," she said finally. It was a small apology, the kind that's more about discomfort than remorse. "I know," I said. Our relationship after that was different, not gone, not repaired. Something in between that I'm still figuring out. I go to her house for Thanksgiving. We talk on the phone. But there's a room in my chest that used to be unlocked when I was with her that I now keep closed, and I think she knows it's there. Landon made the first payment in late June. He made the second in July. He was going to make the third in August when something happened that I hadn't expected. His lender's internal compliance team, doing a routine review of the development's financing history, flagged the Calloway Development Partners entity. They found the operating structure unusual. They started asking questions. Landon called me in a panic. I could hear it in his voice, the specific high-pitched quality that panic has when someone realizes the thing they thought was contained is not in fact contained. "Iris, they're going to find everything." "Yes," I said. "They probably are. Can you? Is there anything?" "Landon." I waited until he stopped talking. "You made the choice. You did this. I made an agreement with you about what I would do, and I'm honoring it. But I can't protect you from every consequence of your own decision. That's not something you get to ask me for." He was silent. The lender's compliance team referred the matter to their legal department. Their legal department, doing their due diligence, notified the U.S. Attorney's Office. I received a call from a federal investigator in September asking if I would be willing to speak with them about Calloway Development Partners. I told them I would. I told them I had a folder they might find useful. I also told them, truthfully, that Landon had been repaying the funds and had made 2 payments in full. I told them about our agreement. I didn't advocate for any particular outcome. I'm not a prosecutor, and it wasn't my place. But I gave them everything I had, and I answered every question they asked. The investigation took several months. I'm not going to give you a detailed account of what happened to Landon legally. Partly because some of it is still ongoing, and partly because it's genuinely not the part of this story that matters most to me. What matters most is this. Simone came by my apartment one evening in October, about 6 months after everything had started coming apart. She brought a bottle of decent Burgundy, and we sat on my couch with biscuit between us, and we drank wine and talked about cases we'd worked and things we wanted to do that had nothing to do with fraud or money or family. At some point, she asked me if I regretted any of it. I thought about it honestly. "I regret that it happened," I said. "I don't regret finding it," she nodded. "There's a difference." "Yeah," I said. "There is." People ask me sometimes what I would say to someone who's in the position I was in, who suspects someone they love has done something they can't unknow, and who is trying to decide whether to look. I always tell them the same thing. Look, not because looking is painless. It isn't. Not because the truth will set you free in any clean or comfortable way. It won't. But because the alternative, living inside a version of your life that's been constructed on a lie someone else told about you, is worse. It is always worse. I found out that my brother had borrowed my identity and my equity to fund his ambition, that my mother had helped him do it, and that the people I trusted most had looked at me and decided I was a resource rather than a person. And I also found out that I was capable of more than I had known, that I could sit in a parking garage in the dark and decide that it wasn't over, that I could build a case with care and patience, and not flinch when it was time to put the folder on the table. I got my money back. All of it, plus interest. A term Simone had insisted we include in the written agreement, and which I had initially thought was excessive, but now consider one of the better decisions of my professional life. I kept my apartment. I kept Biscuit. I kept the investment portfolio, which had grown modestly while everything else was falling apart, because the market doesn't particularly care what's happening in your life. I kept Simone, who is still one of the most important people I know. We go to dinner once a month. She orders the same thing every time and never apologizes for it. What I didn't keep, not exactly, was the version of my family I'd thought I had. That family, the one where my brother called me every Sunday because he loved me, where my mother's voice on the phone meant safety. That family had been built on something I hadn't examined closely enough. When I examined it, it didn't hold. What I have now is something more honest, smaller, more careful. I'll take careful over comfortable. I learned that in the parking garage, sitting in the dark with a sticky note in my hand, engine running, deciding what came next. I decided.